And I went off to college. I didn't even take art in the dark. We called it at Bucknell, Art 101. So I had that wasn't really a big part of me. Somewhere in my 20s, I found out about Klimt and Kandinsky, and they've sort of been my favorites ever. So I chase them now, along with Sargent's. And, there's certain artists, like if I'm going to a city with a museum, I'm going to know what I have to see in that museum. Because honestly, as much as I love museums, 2 hours is it. And I'm gone. I can't take anymore. And so I've traveled then professionally as well, which afforded me a huge amount of opportunity because I don't know, I decided getting wasted in a bar, which I'm in sales and business development, that was part of life. And I certainly did plenty of that. But I also just thought, if I have a couple of hours in the afternoon after some meetings, I'm going to go to a museum. So, I've been to, like I said, a lot of museums in a lot of countries, a lot of cities. And then, so that's a period of 30 years of that. And not much of it was really me personally going, traveling, and seeing other things. My life didn't afford itself to do that, to go off on holidays like that. But then the last 3 years, which sort of coincides with me coming to Chestertown, sort of going crazy with RiverArts and buying all these painters all over the county here, a lot of acquisition, and actually from other places as well, from Maine and New York. And I actually bid for a painting from Freeman's auction house in Philadelphia. So it's been this major acquisition of art, as well as I have gone on vacations. So the last couple of years I went to Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, but I was definitely there to see museums as much as the cities. And then last year I went to Prague, Berlin, Vienna, Bratislava, and Budapest. And actually in Prague I did not see art. It was just didn't work out, but that was too bad. But I saw Prague, which was awesome. And the thing I actually learned from these last couple of trips of going to these smaller countries is there's all these painters we've never heard of. They're not at the Met, they're not at the National Gallery, and they're fantastic. Danish artists, Hungarian artists, really amazing stuff. And a lot of them look familiar to you because they're impressionists or kind of look like Van Gogh or something like that. So if you have the chance to go to these countries, you're going to see some fantastic art, not just, Musée d'Orsay at Paris or the National Gallery in Washington or the Met in New York. So I guess since I've asked all of you to tell me what your favorites are, I will just say that for me, my favorite cities are, I lived in Sydney, and it is the most beautiful, it could be the most beautiful city in the world. The harbor, the Opera House, the Harbor Bridge, but their art isn't great. So, and this topic, and San Francisco is the same way. San Francisco is beautiful. I love the city. I love Chinese food. I love the hills. I love Court Tower. I've been to these cities a lot. I've spent a lot of time in Sydney, San Francisco, London, New York. Yeah, those are probably the main ones. I've spent a combination of months in these places or lived there. So I would say New York, London, Paris, and Vienna. That's 4. And then the top 2 are probably, although I think the Musée d'Orsay is perhaps my favorite museum. New York, just because it's New York, and it has the Met and the Guggenheim and the New Gallery with the Klimts, Klimts for me, and the Whitney, and it's just unbelievable what's available in New York, and it's only 3 hours away as well. And I've had the opportunity to go there a lot because I've had friends living there forever. I just couldn't go there. And this is so much closer than when I lived in Virginia. And I'm there all the time, or had been there all the time. It was the last place I was at before we shut down on well, the last place I came home from on March 3rd, I guess. So, and then Vienna, just because it's just all about Klimt. It's all over the place. There's the Leopold, the Belvedere, the Wien Museum, the Applied Arts Museum, the kind of the old gallery museum. It's all got Klimt. And then it's Vienna, and it's such a small city. It's you know, you can almost walk, or they have their little trolleys. And then the food is great. I mean, honestly, my favorite coffee shop in the world is called Demel, Demel, and it's right off the Stephansplatz, which is beautiful, and the cathedral there is beautiful. And there's actually 80 museums in Vienna, not just art, musical instruments. I mean, it's got to be one of the most concentrated cultural experiences, and it's beautiful. The building, I mean, all the buildings are beautiful. If you haven't been, there's this guy who walks. He lives in Centerville. He walks by my house, and we talk. His name is Bill. I don't know. He was a lawyer from Baltimore, and he's like, we've talked about this kind of stuff, and he's like, okay, if I want to go on one more trip, where should I go? And we've narrowed it down to actually Vienna and Amsterdam. He likes Van Gogh, and he likes the Dutch Golden Age stuff. So I'm an advisor on people taking their last trip in life or something like that. So that's an overview. I guess one other thing I said, I mean, I gave you a link to an article that was just like, here, you know, from Harper's or something that was like, this is 6 cities. And that's kind of the way I think about a city if I'm going into what can I do there. I've scoped it out. At the same time, I'm very serendipitous, you know, something comes up, whatever, finding a restaurant, you know, getting recommendations. You know, you talk to people, you talk to the hotel, you talk to the chef at a restaurant and say, what's your favorite restaurant? So what's the next one I should go to? So I guess I'm always trying to gather information. And in the world of Google and YouTube, and, you know, there's so much available. And actually these last few months, I've sat in all these Zooms I'm sitting on the Zoom from the Whitney at 6 o'clock on I don't even know what the topic is. But with the weather getting better, I've done it less and less, honestly. The topic. So the one topic that I became aware of recently is that there's only 11% of women in all the galleries in the world, all the museums, are women artists. And actually right here in Baltimore, the BMA has committed to only acquire women artists. They were doing it for 2020. I think they're going to expand it. And Baltimore is a great museum. I mean, it's got the Cone collection, which is just unbelievable, especially if you like Matisse. And they're one of the few places that I know of that has Klimt. They have a Klimt in the US. It's not as popular other than the New Gallery in New York. Or maybe he just didn't produce as many works. It's all in Vienna. Go to Vienna, that's where it is. But this whole concept of, and so I've tried to post as many women as I can. I don't know that I've gone over, but you know, it's not available, you know, and I take pictures, and that's really what I've been posting. Although I've sort of been expanding to, I can download, it's supposedly, have I seen it in person? And so, you know, I've only been taking pictures for 3 years, and I haven't been to the Musée d'Orsay since 2009. So they actually don't allow downloads. It's very disappointing. But a lot of other museums do, so I've made use of that. But yeah, I think you know, promoting women in museums is something I would like to, you know, if I had millions of dollars and could acquire paintings, would support. But anyway, what time is it? Oh, perfect. It's 5:15. We have 30 minutes for me to listen to all of you. So,
well, Mark, as you were talking about women artists, I know that Mariah and I doing the, she started kind of the On This Day, the history, and she suddenly started just pulling more, looking for more women artists to include. And as we go to, there's only so many sites that you can go to find things for On This Day. And then recently been pulling in a few more about people of color. And it turns out there's not a lot sometimes to find. So I think it's great to try to to do that. And I noticed that you had posted a picture of a young woman that you had met maybe in New York. It had some really neat works of art sometime in the past couple of weeks. And I wanted to ask you about like amateur art that you, I mean, amateur is probably not the right word, but the people who aren't in the Met, who you still see at galleries in some of these bigger cities. I mean, sometimes those are some of my favorite things to see. And how do you find those, the good ones to go to?
You know, I don't go to galleries that much in New York. I would like to spend more time, but with the plethora of what else is available, you know. The galleries that are here, you know, these are the artists I see in galleries or in their homes and their studios. So actually I've acquired paintings, and I'm really not supposed to be acquiring paintings, but you know, it is what it is. So I actually just bought 2 paintings last night that were texted to me by a gentleman named Tom Sullivan, who is from upstate New York, from the Buffalo area. And I met him on a park bench in Northeast Harbor, Maine, 3 years ago, Sunday. And the memory popped up on my Facebook, and I called him. And we were chatting. It was early in the morning. He brought paintings to this gallery in Northeast Harbor that had been open for 30 or 40 years, and he had shown there very many times, and they were closing the gallery. And so she had invited all her artists to show. So I ended up buying a watercolor of which he says is the Chesapeake Bay. And I had an offer on this house. He swears it's a cat. I'm looking at it, it's a cat boat. It's a watercolor and 2 oils from him out of the back of his truck. And I haven't bought anything from him since. We're in touch. He sends me a watercolored Christmas card. He says he makes 50 a year, and I get one, and the other 49 go to his girlfriends. But so I contacted him on Sunday just to say, hey, Tom, it was 3 years ago. We met on that park bench like Forrest Gump. And he started firing off what he had in his place, and I bought 2 of them. So, oh well, they're gorgeous. He works in oil and watercolor, and it's a lot of nautical boats, and it's all up around Lake Erie. So I'm not even a boat guy, you know, so go figure. And then this other one, young woman, you're talking about, Morgan Everhart. I guess it's an Instagram thing. Somehow I guess really just for a year or so I've been on Instagram, and Instagram is different than Facebook. Facebook, you friend your friends, so you sort of know them before. Whereas Instagram is very much the wide world. And Instagram's algorithms also, if they know Mark likes art, they're going to suggest you follow people. So somehow I followed this woman, and she was very cool. I liked her stuff. And she's in New York, and I'm in New York all the time. And I guess one time I just emailed her on her website and said, hey, I like your stuff. I'm going to be in New York. She invited me over to her studio, and we're in touch. And she auctioned a piece, some small work she does for the then this was like a month ago, or 2 months ago, NAACP's educational programs, and I bid on it, and I actually paid half of what her retail is. And she's 28. She's been in New York for 3 years. She's from Texas. She got her master's at MICA in Baltimore. And she went to New York and was in a studio that Keith Haring, if he's kind of a pop artist, that was his studio. It was sort of this prestigious thing for her to have this space. And however she met this woman, her dealer was a curator at the Met who knows lots of rich New Yorkers. And so this little piece retails for $600. Her big pieces go for 18. thousand, and she's 28 years old, and she's living off the proceeds of her art in New York City. So anyway, I texted her to join us, but I didn't hear back. I've been texting. I started texting people like at 3 o'clock. Hey, not doing anything at 5. So,
Join us.
but so there's two kind of serendipitous stories, which I suppose is the way I am.
Well, thank you. I knew you wanted to hear from some of the other people who joined us, and
Yes.
I know that people travel a lot and probably have some interesting stories to share.
Perhaps Floyd would like to start.
Well, Floyd would tell you exactly what you would expect to hear, and that is that I love the Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow. And my favorite place in the Kelvin Grove is the room devoted to the Glasgow boys. At the end of the 19th century, they did a lot of plein air impressionist paintings of small town Scotland and rural Scotland, and did in fact travel to the Mediterranean area and so on. But the collection is so surprising because a lot of Scottish art is dark and depressing, and the Glasgow boys it just shimmers, it jumps off the wall at you. And so at some time when you're interested in going back to Scotland, go back to Glasgow and go to the Kelvin Grove. It's an amazing, amazing place.
I think you told me to go. It just didn't fit into my
I know.
42-hour.
You're like my husband, you listen, but you don't, but that's okay.
No, I'm sure you told me that. I didn't have time in Glasgow. That's it.
Yeah.
So would anyone else like to go, or do I have to cold call you? Melinda.
Well, one of my favorite places you would not be able to go to was in Namiye, Japan, and it's because they're south of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. So most of the area has now been, quarantined off or cordoned off. But anyway, the reason I like it so much is a small agricultural town, and I was there for 10 days, and they had all these little studios all along several streets, and the potters all invited me in to look at all their wares, and it was the most imaginative pottery I've seen in a long time. And they showed me, how to make it. They invited me in for tea. And then there's this other kind of pottery they make there. It's a green cracked pottery, and a lot of it has a hand-painted running horse, which is a symbolic image for the people of Namiye. But anyway, another thing I liked about that little town is all the houses, whether they were just, large or small, they always had a little arrangement outside on their front stoop, and they were all artful. I mean, these people, everything they did was artistic. And even if they had one plant, they had it arranged in a way that just was perfect. So as you strolled along all these streets in the little town, they just have this creative flair for doing things it's very simplistic, but it just looks so right. So that's one place, my favorite place. Of course, and that's a very small town, Namiye. And some of the potters have left and tried to, go to another place so they could try to keep that pottery going, because it's been going on for more than, I think it's almost 400 years when it was first established, a certain type that they make. But for a big city, of course, it would be Paris for me, but I haven't been to Vienna or a lot of other big cities, London, yes. And but of course, for the d'Orsay and the Louvre, I mean, how can you not love that? But then another small area that I really liked are the hill towns in Umbria, especially Assisi, where you can go in and see the cathedral where St. Francis is buried, and the Giotto frescoes and all. I just like all the hilltop towns and all the little cathedrals, the basilicas. So that's my idea. I like to see how villagers live, and I don't usually go for the great big grand things that are well known. I try to just see how everyone's living and what kind of art they're doing and that sort of thing. So that's it.
Okay. Colleen.
Sometimes some of the best travel experiences are really just seeing how people live, you know,
Yeah.
not necessarily doing the tourist activities, but just immersing yourself in a different place and a different time for a short time.
Yeah, that's what I like to do. I really enjoy that.
Colleen.
Well, as you know, what I have in my house is an awful lot of Japanese woodblock prints. I absolutely love the simplicity. I don't have the floating world prints, you know, of the actors in the kabuki. I have much more nature prints, and for me makes my life much more serene. But traveling, I've spent a lot of time in Italy, and I really love Byzantine works. And, you know, particularly going to Ravenna and seeing all the mosaics. And then, of course, in Rome, there are a number of churches with incredible mosaics. And when I am in Rome, I a lot of times I just wander up and down streets, and I go into every church that I go by, because every church has at least one thing that's incredible. It might be a fresco, it might be a carving, it might be sculpture, but there's always going to be one thing that just knocks your socks off. I mean, remember just wandering into a church and there was a Masaccio. It was like, it was so fantastic. Wow. Not a Masaccio, Caravaggio. I went to Vienna for the first time in this past, well, I was there over New Year's, and we spent like 6.5 hours in the Kunsthistorie Museum, and then went back the next morning for another 3 hours. And we just spent the whole time there practically going to museums, and I wish we had spent more time there. My friend got a ticket she lives in Rome, and she got a ticket going for $80 round trip. So she went back for 4 days, a few days after, you know, a couple weeks after we were there. And I definitely want to go. I want to go back. It's some of the best art I've ever seen in the world. You know, that museum, there isn't a second-rate piece in the museum. Everything is top. The Habsburgs had a lot of money, and they spent a lot of it on art. So, you know, a lot of places I like to go. There are plenty of places I haven't been and want to go. And if we ever get through this pandemic, I will start traveling again.
You know, the first time I went to Vienna, it was really just like an in and out business trip. But I knew like there was Klimt there, but I didn't do my research. So I ended up at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, and there's maybe some there, I don't know, but it's really more of the older stuff. And so then I found the Secession, which is this building that Klimt did all these, they're called the Beethoven friezes. And so I saw that. But I came away like, okay, I missed this. And then I discovered that everything is at the Belvedere Palace and in this private collection called, it's a guy named Leopold. It's like the Barnes collection. and he just has a ton of Klimt and a ton of this guy, Egon Schiele, who I really like,
Yeah.
who's very different from Klimt, but Klimt was his mentor, and he produced, a lot of it is very, it looks like someone with a twisted mind did a lot of it, but I just find it fascinating. And there's a lot of other artists from that period, the fin de siècle, the early 1900s, that a lot of people have never heard of. I'm gonna get around to posting some of them here because I have a ton. I really have become like this snap, 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 snap. Now I'm missing out on a lot of artists because I don't really like them all that much. I'm not a big fan of Renoir. I think everything is too pretty. And actually, the women artist, Mary Cassatt, doesn't really do it for me. So you're not going to see a whole lot of that from me. But yeah, there's like, I mean, really, so I need to go back to Colleen's museum because in these last 2 trips, I spent no time there. I was at the Belvedere, I was at the Leopold, I was at all these other, I was chasing Klimt. You know, isn't there a movie like that, Chasing something? But anyway. So anyone else want to go?
Well, I have to say that, so I worked at the Walters Art Gallery for 10 years. I was the editor there. So I got to know a lot of the museums, and I have traveled. But one of the joys I have is traveling around and then discovering local art, whether it's good or bad. I mean, I can still remember shortly after moving to Baltimore in the mid-70s, walking down the sidewalk, and there was this huge Henry Moore just sitting there in the middle of a sidewalk. This huge Henry Moore. Now they've moved it. They put it, I think it's inside the convention center now, but I could be wrong unless they've moved it again. But as you travel around, you find all sorts of things. In Thailand, they have these fabulous temples with all these colors on them, and they are made of broken china. And apparently centuries ago, China would send would send shiploads of china over to Thailand for the royal family, and some of the pieces would arrive broken, and they started putting them on the sides of the temples, and they're just phenomenal. If you look at them closely, they're just amazing. These huge temples with broken china, just glittering off of them. And while I wouldn't call some of the things I really appreciate fine art, I think it's an expression of human beings. One of my favorite that I discovered a few years ago, and it's just so totally off the wall, is Carhenge. So should one ever go to Nebraska and you take the Sand Hills Highway all the way to the western end to Alliance, Nebraska, they have Carhenge, and somebody thought this would be a good tourist attraction. So they took all of these Chevy and Ford bodies and spray painted them gray, and then constructed a Stonehenge out of these cars. And they're on the edge of the town. And then other people have come along and they've used cars to make sculptures of dinosaurs and all sorts of other things, and they surround this Carhenge. It's phenomenal. I do have to say that the year I was there was the total eclipse of the sun was the following year, and apparently the eclipse of the sun went directly in line with Carhenge, so they were going to throw a big party. But it's maybe not quite as bad as finding the largest ball of string somewhere, but to find the local expression of art, even if it's bad art, is sometimes just wonderful. I mean, it just sort of feeds your spirit or appalls it.
Pam, I totally agree. The thing that when we travel, we love to go to the museums. I went to the Tate in London for the first time last year and was just awed.
Yeah.
But when I'm in a new city or just on some small vacation, whether it's New Orleans or whether it's somewhere in the Caribbean or Europe, we always come home with something, and it may not be high art, but I'm always drawn to color. And I love seeing public art out wherever it is. And, it's that unexpected turning a corner and seeing the mosaic wall. Or there's somebody on, I think it's Millennium Bridge in London. who does chewing gum art. Like, so he takes the pieces of chewing gum that are literally ground into the little ridges of the bridge, and then makes these cute little, like what look like cartoon drawings. So you can catch this artist like down on his knees, like drawing these little pieces of art that are like this big. And my daughter found them, and then, we Googled it, and he's like a well-known person that does this there. And it's those unexpected joys to find that you can't take home with you. And then the ones that you can, that are, maybe a little cheesy, maybe they're not high art. Sometimes some of them are wonderful art, but those are the souvenirs that are most meaningful, and that's fun to explore.
Well, years ago, we went down to St. John's, and St. John's has petroglyphs carved onto the side of the mountains, and it's not easy to get to. You can get to it, but you do have to climb up a big mountain to get to it. So we did that, and just really enjoyed looking at the petroglyphs. And then I found this little old potter who spoke a patois. I could barely understand her, and she did pieces, and I do love pottery, by the way, with the petroglyphs on them. And I still have one of the little serving bowls that has the St. John's petroglyphs on it. Just, it's a nice piece of pottery too, but little bits of art.
I have to say the Waters Gallery is a gem. I love the Waters, and I covered a show on illuminated manuscripts for a Pennsylvania newspaper. One year, and then I had a tour with Tom McHugh, took a few of us over there. We got a tour of the whole place. I love the Waters. I think it's such a gem.
It is a gem of a museum. Again, like Mark says, there are some big names in there, but they're not too many big names in there. What they have is incredibly fine art from different.
Walters had a good advisor. A lot of these guys weren't deciding themselves, including Paul.
Well, actually, he just bought everything.
Yeah,
he bought shiploads of art and brought it over from Europe.
Yeah, but they had people helping them too.
The curators stepped in.
Yeah, there's a lot of fantastic things. They had Fabergé eggs in there. They're unbelievable.
Yeah, and the manuscripts are just, they're just remarkable.
Those manuscripts or something.
Yeah.
They really are. Yeah.
There's just too many things. I focus on paintings predominantly, but I went to the Wallace collection in London, and they had unbelievable pottery in there and manuscripts. I like illuminations.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to, we must have seen them in Italy when I was 16, 17 or something like that, seeing those. But and public art is awesome. It's everywhere. Actually, Merity in the pink down here on the bottom and I were down in Fells Point a week ago, Saturday, and we're walking around, and here's this head of Frederick Douglass in the middle of, out in Fells Point,
wow.
in the square area. It became my post the next day. And it's some Micah, the guy went to Micah in Baltimore, and he's apparently a pretty famous artist now. But yeah, and there's the art, the murals, the art that's everywhere. I've posted tons of that. Most of these guys are pretty famous. They're definitely on Instagram. They post their stuff, and they have their names. They're actually posting their Instagram, or they sign it with their Instagram hashtag, so you can look them up. And if I post the mural, I tag them, and a lot of times they like it. Like we have this little connection with somebody I've never met and probably never will. I've actually had a couple cool things happen with this whole posting thing. And it happens on Instagram because it's an open community. But the first thing that happens is I was posting a painting by Jamie Wyeth, the youngest of the Wyeths. And I said that it was my understanding that Andrew Wyeth learned from NC, his father, and that Jamie learned from Andrew. Next thing you know, I have Victoria Browning Wyeth saying, hashtag, or her little @ that's what, says @ Victoria Browning Wyeth says, no, that's not correct. Jamie learned from his Aunt Carolyn. So maybe Dad wasn't interested in, but anyway, I looked her up. She gives she gives speeches about the family kind of thing. and I thought we could get it for RiverArts for this very venue, the salon. She charges $2,500 to do that. But nonetheless, now I'm on email with this woman. So every time I've posted a Wyeth, I say, do you have anything you want? And so sometimes you have gotten what's been said about a Wyeth painting is out of the mouths of Andrew Wyeth's only grandchild, and is the daughter of Jamie's brother, who was not an artist. He's an art dealer, which is no shocking thing. But anyway, yeah, we just kibitzed. Last week I posted this painting, Catching Pollen, which was actually a recommendation by somebody who didn't want to be identified as the curator. And she was the one who told me about her aunt, and I don't know if you saw in the painting that she's on crutches and that she had a disability for a number of years, and we ended up talking about my wife who had a disability too. So it was kind of cool. And I've had other artists or grandchildren of people, you know, kind of like Barnes' grandson comment or something like that. So it's, you know, I don't know. It's just kind of a cool thing for me anyway. So anyway, we have 4 minutes. Would anyone else like to share?
Well, I mean, I
haven't got that many
listening
recommendations.
to everybody, but
Carol.
I've traveled mostly on bareboat sailing trips to Croatia, Guadeloupe, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica. But recently I went on that trip sponsored by Washington College to Cuba.
Mhm.
And I have nothing will ever compare to the art that was in Cuba.
Wow.
Everywhere you look, this whole village was tile mosaic, and we were supposed to meet the man who started it, who I think is like 80. He wasn't well. We got to sit inside this little hole in the wall studio that was inside the village, but it's certainly as big as all downtown Chestertown. And he started it by knocking on the door of slum houses and said, do you mind if I decorate your house? And he started taking broken dishes and and it's a whole mosaic city that is beyond anything that you can imagine. So that was wonderful. But because the college has been going there, these two professors, for 5 years, we stayed in the homes of people. And they had an art historian come to the house, talk to us. We got us on a bus, and we went to the homes of the most famous 4 artists in the country. I mean, their houses. We were sitting there in their house having tea. One of them, their big paintings all over Europe, Belgium, wherever, selling for $25,000. I brought back a few prints, pen and ink prints, but one of the most meaningful things, there was a tiny gallery she took us to, and this group found there were mentally ill people in the countryside busying themselves with doing art. And so they started a studio in the city of Havana. And I got to meet the man of a little picture that I bought of his to give to friends that just moved here from Annapolis. I mean, he was right there, and he said, that's mine. And the whole studio, upstairs, downstairs, out on the porch, it's schizophrenic and mentally ill people in this studio. So for me, as a special educator, that brought me to tears. But if you can ever get to Cuba, buried in art, that's all we went for the National Jazz Festival, but it was a combination of art. And so that was worth, my parents are from Germany, and my mother's from Vienna. So I've been to Germany and Austria a little bit, and the Tate in London, and LACMA in LA, but nothing prepared me for the art in Cuba. Nothing. I mean, I just, you know, couldn't get, I would have slept on the street in that village that night just to stay there. So if you ever get to go, it's, it's just mind boggling. It's all, you're surrounded by it.
Sounds
So,
like an incredible trip. And I'm thinking just, since Mariah and I are always putting the daily dose together and we have the benefit of Mark's art, if each of you who has mentioned something happens to have an easily accessible picture that you can find on your computer hard drive, if you want to email me a picture of something that's a favorite from someplace you've traveled, I'll be happy to put them in over the next week or two. That would be really fun. I'd love to see some of the things that you all have mentioned. I know you each probably have hundreds of pictures, but if you want to pick one that just really speaks to you, that would be fun. Merdy, you put a question in the chat. Did Mark kind of answer your question as he talked at the beginning?
What?
No, he didn't.
Would you like to ask?
No. So Mark, I would like you to describe an especially fond memory of seeing a specific painting or exhibit. I want to hear how you feel, like an experience, because I've been with you in museums and Mark takes his time. I'm like way ahead, and you really sit and think on a painting. So if you don't mind, just like something you
Pictures, it
thought
takes a
about.
long time.
No. Short though, not a whole lot, just a little. Like something cool.
Wow. Something cool in an exhibit.
Like that touched you.
Okay, so I saw, I was in New York 2 years ago, 2 years ago almost, and I was at a conference at Columbia, and I had never been to Columbia before. It was just a day conference. I stayed up in Harlem. And actually, there was a mural right across the street by this guy called at Astro, a public mural. And that was one of the first times I posted on Instagram. And that guy reached out to me and said, "That's very cool. Where are you staying?" kind of thing. I was in this hotel. But anyway, so as I do, because I'm at Columbia, it's like, well, Columbia, because art museum, or the university art museums, many of them are just outrageous. Smith, Harvard, Yale, Bowdoin, they just have these unbelievable art collections. So I figured Columbia must have one. Actually, they don't really have much of a permanent collection, as it turns out, but there was an exhibit there that was focusing on women artists. It was so it was really quite a variety of women artists, but also of new women artists. And that's where I discovered this woman, Mickalene Thomas, who is definitely a powerhouse of American art, 50-ish, along with this woman, Kara Walker. But there was also a juxtaposition with some masters, especially French. Anyway, I'll get to why, but a lot of French artists and their presentation of women in like Olympia. I posted not too long ago, which is a very famous painting of a white prostitute, actually, and her black maid. And one of the pieces there was, and I posted these together, was they had a black prostitute and a white maid, and so, and it was very new art predominantly, and it was very old, like kind of 19th century art. And the thing that was very cool for me is the woman who curated this was a black woman who had just finished her PhD in art history at Columbia and had come together with this idea and got funding from the Ford Foundation and got all these pieces together. I mean, she's like, I don't think she's necessarily 28 years old, but she's like just finished her dissertation. This was what she wrote her dissertation about, this subject. And then was able to get all these pieces together. And this show was at Columbia's like gallery. but then it was going to the Musée d'Orsay. And actually Olympia was part of the deal, but they just had a picture of it because that doesn't travel. So I don't know, the whole thing just blew me away. The concept that this woman was able to do this and the things that were represented in that exhibit. Is that good, Merity?
Okay. Thank you.
So anyway, I know we're like over time, but I just want to tell a story about art. Some of you probably know this story. So obviously I moved here because my wife's aunt and uncle live here. So, but I came here the first time I spent an overnight trip. We used to just come out from Virginia and crab feast or whatever. And I came to downrigging. I guess it was 5 years ago. And the morning of downrigging, the Saturday, we went on a bird walk on this farm. And I met the gentleman who I guess owned the farm and his daughter. And he said, we've been here for 11 generations or something like that. And that was very impressive. And we went on this bird walk and then we walked out this tree lined, just kind of double dirt track road, this big long driveway. And then we went off and then I was with Floyd. Lanny had to go do something with downrigging and we're walking around galleries and we go in this little building and there's a painting outside the door of the gallery. And it was of the driveway of this farm, and it's by Melinda Carl. It's a pastel. So I bought that like 5 years ago before I ever thought I was going to move here. And then it turns out that this farm is owned by the Wood family. And so it was actually Mariah's uncle, James, who I met that day. So anyway, and Mariah's our executive director, and her father lives here, Robin, and her uncle also, and I know the family pretty well. So that's sort of a serendipitous art story, I suppose. So, but I still moved here because Lanny called me up and said, Mark, you need to live here. So that's why I'm here. So.
That's a really cool story. And Melinda, wave to all of us because you're right here with us, right? So that was your painting.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And
So
for those of you who I should have introduced at the beginning, that Mariah is trying desperately to take a little bit of time off this week and not check email and not check our Slack channel and all of those things. And even though we occasionally, there's still a tiny little something she's trying to do, we're trying to keep her just, taking a little bit of time to breathe. And so she would have normally been here, and I think she would have really enjoyed the conversation today. So Mark, thank you for talking, and thanks to everybody else for really sharing your stories. It's making me homesick for travel, if that phrase even makes sense. And I can't wait till we can all get out and do that again. And we usually end with a toast. And I think for today, with something simple, just in terms of thanking Mark for his time, everybody for their energy and thoughts. And here's to the time when this pandemic is far enough behind us that we can travel and share these news stories together. So cheers.
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 Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.